Hi, so I ran my second session of Pathfinder 2E yesterday, and I wanted to talk about how it went. It definitely went better than the first session, due to us not spending the entire session in one room. The players actually made progress this time, progressing down the cliff, through the spider's room, clearing the barricade, and eventually finishing the session in the undead crypt. So, the first thing that they did was heal the party, the ones that needed healing from the rat encounter. After some advice from the comments of the last video and from people in my Discord, we have figured out that the main source of healing is supposed to be the treat wounds action using the medicine kit. So we retconned the two players who have medicine trained to have a healer's kit, and as such they began healing. So neither of them have actually spec'd into the correct stats for healing, meaning even though they're trained, we only have a +3 and a +4. I mean, it was not really a guarantee that the healing was going to be successful. In fact, it was more like a 50-50. And over the course of the session, we did have two situations where critical fails happened. One of them being especially bad timing, which I will get to. However, after the healing was done, it took about 20 in-game minutes. They headed forwards into the dark of the underground cave system. They got to the cliff, and we began to talk about how skill checks work, essentially. I received some really good advice from someone called Velvet Slime in my Discord, who explained that when they ran the beginner's box, they would take it out of the action for a few seconds. They would break the immersion and sort of explain, hey, in this room, we're going to learn how to do X, Y, Z. I thought that was really good advice, and especially during this tutorial beginner's box, it made a lot of sense. So I've started doing that in this session. I explained this is how you make skill checks, this is how it's going to work, and the players began rolling. The first two made it down fine, with successes or critical successes on the athletics check. Third one failed, unfortunately. Crit failed, unfortunately, so tumbled down the cliff, took a bit of damage. Having seen that, the fourth one tied a rope, and they attempted it. Unfortunately, they nat one. So even with the reduced DC, they still took a nasty fall, took a bit of damage. So now we have two players who have, unfortunately, taken damage after the healing had been done. Not much we could do about that, though. The last player managed to make it down with a critical success, so they just screwed on down the rope. All good. In this next room, the spider encounter, we learn about saving throws and how to avoid ground hazards, specifically the webs in this case. They tried to sneak across, but the first player immediately failed their check to avoid the webs, and so the encounter began. It was in this encounter that I realized how sort of spiky the combat can be, the damage especially with crits. We had the summoner use their Eidolon to charge the spider, and they landed a critical hit, which left the spider with only 4 hit points, despite the fact that nobody else had even hit it yet. There's not anything wrong with this. I assume this is how the combat is intended to work. It's a critical hit. It's supposed to be quite punchy. But it was interesting to see the severity of how high the damage can be. There's a crit later in the game in the crypt where our gunslinger did 31 damage to a 4 health skeleton due to the crit stacking with the fatal trait. I assume that Gunslinger's almost supposed to hunt for these crits in their playstyle, because he was also using 1 shot, 1 kill with that. So it really stacked this really powerful shot. Luckily, it was a 4 health skeleton, which likely would have been 1 shot anyway. But I was thinking the zombie is intended to be the main threat in this encounter, and that could have 1 shot the zombie as well. So I'm a little nervous if that works the other way around. Can monsters deal as damaging crits to the players and essentially one-shot them, or very nearly one-shot them. Because from the advice I received in the last video, it seems like healing is not intended for in combat. Can be in combat, but it's not like where you're going to get most of your healing. So, yeah, I'm a little nervous about players getting just wiped by a stray crit, but I guess we'll find out. It's probably going to be more of an issue at higher levels, I suppose. So yeah, it was interesting to see how quickly the tide of battle can change due to things like crits, especially when crits are more common due to the plus 10 rule as opposed to just natural 20s. But yeah, they killed the spider pretty swiftly. I think it was just one round of combat and it was dead, which is really good. We did get one bite on a player, so they did get to experience how saving throws work, which was good. Education was had. Then they found the loot, so they took the fancy sword and the potion. I did up the potions to 2 since I have 5 players, and I want to make sure that there's enough to go around. But yeah, it was a pretty smoothly handled encounter. We then got to the barricade, which they took down using thievery skill because they do have a rogue in the party. But it did lead to a question with the summoner. The summoner was curious as to when things like navigating cliffs or dealing with the barricade in this example, when do they decide whether they make the check as a character or whether their eidolon does? I assume whoever's better makes the check, or the context of the situation will apply. For example, I don't think a wolf eidolon, which is what they have, can just kind of climb vertically down a surface. So I guess that kind of should tell us when who should be doing it. But if there are any like hard and fast rules for it, I would like to know them. So I'm probably gonna have to research that just to see if it is a case of you just pick in the moment. But yeah, they dealt with the barricade pretty simply. It didn't really take too much time. And then we progressed into the crypt, the undead fight. They awoke the zombies and skeletons, and the combat began. And they were going through the combat pretty smoothly, all things considered. They were killing skeletons in basically one shot. There was a couple of interactions where their resistances meant that they just took no damage. Like somebody tried to stab one and dealt 4 piercing damage, which was reduced to 0. But that was a good example of how they get to learn then how weaknesses and resistances work. So it's a good educational moment. I will be honest, I kind of messed up a rule here. So the zombie has the slowed condition, and I did not understand what the slowed condition was. And in the heat of the fight, I didn't take the time to actually look at it. I assumed that the virtual tabletop Foundry would handle it for me because it handles everything else. Turns out, of course, that the slowed condition reduces the amount of actions it gets, which Foundry can't really do that because the actions are decided by the player, or by, in this case, by me. So I just did 3 actions as usual and assumed that the character sheet had been modified to apply whatever slowed was. That's fully on me. I should have looked ahead of time at the encounter, made sure that I understood every part of it, including the slowed condition. And annoyingly, that did lead to a player going down. However, silver lining, it meant we learnt how the downed or dying condition works. So our gnome, Sesto, was grabbed by the zombie and bitten, which brought him down to 0 HP. Normally, he wouldn't be able to do that, because obviously you have to land the punch first, or sorry, the fist first. And then from there, take an action to grab, and then take an action to bite, which is 3 actions. I shouldn't be able to do it, but I wasn't aware. Luckily, when he did go down, Foundry, in this case, is pretty good at handling this kind of thing. I applied the dying condition, and it applied all the things that affect him, which was really handy. Allowed us to see how his AC is affected, how his action economy is affected. And then he started making his recovery checks on the next round. He succeeded, which meant he immediately went back to stabilized, which is good. It seems like you can recover pretty quickly from dying. as long as it's like the first time you die. I assume that's why the wounded condition exists. Unlike in 5th edition, where you have to stack 1, 2, 3 successes or 1, 2, 3 failures, and then things are resolved. In Pathfinder, it seems to be more of like a sliding scale, and you're fighting to get it back to 0. And if you get it to 4, then you die. Which, yeah, the first time you go down means you just only need 1 recovery on your first turn, and maybe if you're lucky, you can get straight back to stabilized. And then the wounded condition stacks where your starting position is. This is my understanding of it. I might be wrong, hopefully not, though. So now that he's died once, he has wounded 1, which means when he goes down, he'll start at dying 1. And then if he recovers, he'll go to wounded 2, which means he'll start at dying 2. And so forth until eventually he'll start at dying 3 and be at the risk of immediately dying. So yeah, when he went down, it was handled by Foundry, so it was pretty simple. When he was stabilized, there was a question of what happens if he takes damage. Because this was when one of our poorly timed Nat 1 medicine checks happened. And he dealt damage to the stabilized Sesto, which we kind of assumed would knock him back into the dying status, but we're not 100% sure on that. So in panic, they quickly just shoved a potion down his throat, got him back onto his feet, and he now has the wounded condition. So yeah, that did lead to another question of, does the wounded condition have anything to do with the Eidolon? I don't think so, because it seems like the Eidolon just poofs away when you go unconscious. So I think the wounded is like just for the summoner, which is fine. Clearly there's still a lot for me to learn, but that is the point of the beginner's box. That's why we're doing it, so that we can get through it. That's also the point of this channel, so that I can put this out there. And some of you have been super kind in the last video to leave very comprehensive feedback on how the rules work. That has been extremely helpful, so I really appreciate the people who took the time to do that. Hopefully, if people are feeling generous, some feedback can be left on this video, just to save me having to troll the internet for stuff. There was actually one other thing that's really confusing us, and we can't find any like hard rules on it online. The gunslinger keeps being in a position where they're trying to make ranged attacks on distant targets, but there is an enemy within 5 feet of them. I can't find any rules on it. I can find a rule for if they're attacking the creature that is within 5 feet of them, but as far as I can tell, it looks like they can just freely shoot distant creatures, even while being like badgered by something. I'm not sure if I just need to look hard, but I can't find the part of the rules that is explaining that. So if anyone could advise on what do you do when your ranged attacks are while you're in melee range of something, that would be really helpful. So the players are now looking to go back to town. They've cleared these first few rooms, and they're a little nervous about pushing forwards, especially because most of them are still on their healer's kit cooldown, the hour-long one. They probably have another like 20 minutes on it, and then they can attempt to heal again. And I guess they've still got their 5th edition brains of like, we can't just stand here or something will come and attack us, you know. But I'm quite supportive of the idea of them going back to town and taking a long rest, getting rid of that wounded condition for Sesto, getting back any spell slots that have been expended, taking a little time to rest. It won't be much hit points for most of these guys, but it does mean we can like do some rapid healers kitting to sort each other out. So yeah, I'm quite on board with them going back to town. Next session, which will be in 2 weeks, they'll be going deeper into the dungeon and hopefully dealing with some kobolds, maybe clearing the rest of this floor. If they do so, then we'll be able to push on to the 2nd floor where things get a little more nasty. They can learn about stealthing enemies and things like that. if they do go back to town, it means we get to try the downtown stuff, which will be really fun because the downtime looks very comprehensive compared to 5th edition. So I'm really interested to see like how we can use that. And there's no rush on this beginner's box encounter. It'll take them as long as it takes them, and we need to make sure that everyone's learning the game, so I'm not going to rush it. But yeah, that is everything, I believe. Thank you so much for watching. Like I said, if you have the time or any advice that could be left in the comments, that would be super appreciated by me. As it's just really the stuff in the last video was really helpful. Any likes or subscriptions to the channel, again, would be super appreciated. This is a very small channel, so that stuff goes like a really long way to both motivation for myself, but also for pushing this to more people, so it gets more engagement, gets seen by more people, and in turn I can see a little bit more advice from people. Have a great day. I'll see you in 2 weeks, unless you are subscribed, in which case there's going to be a very fun zombie-based homebrew video for 5th edition coming out soon. So look forward to that. Have a good day. Goodbye.